Oh, old acquaintances. Hello. You still read your lectures without any appeal?
And no policy change in order.
If you have time, of course, tell uneducated me a lecture about the present moment.
The party does not read lectures about the present. The party reads lectures about the past.
Okay, then please read me a lecture about the year 2014 and 2015.
What exactly are you interested in? Russia's aggression in Ukraine.
Was there aggression of Russia and Ukraine with combat actions in 2014 and 2015?
Certainly.
Tell me, please, where were these hostilities?
On the territory of Crimea and the territory of eastern Ukraine.
Excuse me, but was there any fighting on the territory of Crimea?
There were no fights. There was aggression. It is not always accompanied by fights.
So, please tell me, you are a competent person, as far as I know, a historian by education. Ukraine in its act of independence from August 24th, 1991. In the preamble, I do not remember literally how exactly it was. I do not remember, but it was indicated there in general, in simple terms, in the context of the mess happening in Moscow. Well, you remember these events in Moscow, the White House there. You probably remember that those are dangerous phenomena for its existence. And then Crimea, the Crimean Autonomous Region, after the Maidan, copied the preamble, practically rewrote the preamble of what was in the act of August 24th, declared by Ukraine, and on this basis also declared its independence. Tell me, please, can I?
There were connection issues. I did not understand who rewrote what.
Well, the Parliament of Crimea,
Oh,
when the government declared independence, brought the same reasons that Ukraine brought on August 24th, 1991.
are you sure?
Well, I read your Act of Independence and read what the Crimens wrote. If there were differences in words, then the point was the same.
Let's read the words and try to understand the meaning.
Less.
In the act of independence of Ukraine, it is said that based on the coup, this is only the reason, a push, as it was literally written. There is a reason.
An implicit reason?
No, there is a reason, and there is a cause. Remember,
Ah, I see.
this is a cause, and the reason is to continue the millennial tradition of state administration of Ukraine continues, based on the right to self-determination by statute on the UN Charter, and based on the Declaration of State Sovereignty from July 16th, 1990. So, the reasons for the Declaration of Independence: the millennial tradition of state administration, the right of the nation to self-determination, and the actual implementation of the Declaration of State Sovereignty. These are the three main reasons, and the cause was the events in Moscow. Hold it. Now, let's try to read and find the Act of Declaration of Independence of Crimea. I have never read it. Perhaps now, for the first time in my life, I will read it. Let's see what is there. Do you remember the name of the document?
I don't remember. I admit it.
Now I'll try to find it. But it may take a long time.
Unfortunately, my computer doesn't work. I could also look from phone, but I don't have any other equipment.
I understand. Now, let's try to find it. To find this document, it is from 2014, right?
Yes, yes, yes. I don't remember. I think it was in February.
Well, it's a trouble to find it. I've never read this paper in my life.
Unfortunately, I can't help you because my computer.
Now, we will try to find with Opera. Act on the declaration. The Declaration of the Independence of Crimea in 2014.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, let's try to find this thing. There. The page doesn't work. Crimea.fru. That is probably the official website of the Supreme Council of Crimea. It doesn't work. We'll have to look for unofficial websites.
Okay. It's a pity, of course. But I think we often.
We'll meet again, yes.
Yes, we will meet. It was from you that I heard for the first time the separate definitions of reason and cause. When they say why Russia invaded Ukraine.
There are lots of reasons, and there is a cause. It's the so-called alliance with
Yes,
DPRK.
yes, exactly. They often confuse the reason with the cause. In your opinion, what is the main reason?
Of Russia's attack on Ukraine.
Yes, Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
In my opinion, my personal opinion, your society and your elite did not recognize the fact of the collapse of the Soviet Union and reacted to it negatively. If in Ukraine they positively perceived the act of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian society perceived it negatively. But in the 90s, you had other problems, like hunger, a lot of problems. And when the prices of oil increased and stood back up, you remembered that you have a negative attitude towards Ukraine, that you do not recognize Ukraine as a sovereign state, and the Ukrainian people as a separate nation. Putin wrote a whole article about this on the Kremlin.ru website. These are the reasons for the lack of recognition of Ukraine as a state, the Ukrainian people as a separate nation.
You think this is the reason?
This is my personal opinion.
We are here one-on-one. Your opinion is what I want to hear. Tell me, please, do the events of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014 remind you of anything? The events of 1962, I don't know. You were probably younger than me, I remember it well. I was already 25 years old. The events of 1962, which now in history are called the Caribbean Crisis.
It doesn't remind me at all. It reminds me of the invasion of Czechoslovakia, for example, in 1968.
Well, I agree with you that there was an invasion, but in my opinion, there were somewhat other reasons.
Well, of course, there are other reasons.
If I say something like this, I want you to just, as a person who thinks, maybe I'm not a historian, I'm a tech guy, used to working with hardware. Then the case is as follows. In 1962, as you know, this crisis arose because the Soviet Union's missile bases began to be prepared at Cuba. That is, under the nose of the Americans. And the military approached John Kennedy, you could say with a knife in his teeth, saying, "Let's take Cuba off the face of the earth." because it will be a constant threat to the United States. That island is dozens of kilometers away from the United States. Don't you think so? That the real reason for Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that Ukraine introduced into its constitution a point called the path to NATO. And in the NATO, as you know, the United States of America plays a leading role. This, in general, you probably will not argue. And in the military doctrine of the United States of America, the main, not enemies, the main opponents are noted. This is, in the first place, there's also Iran. But in the first place, it is China and Russia. Don't you think that the parallel is between 1962 and what has happened now between Ukraine and Russia?
No, I don't think so. For one simple reason, that the introduction of the NATO aspiration into the preamble of the Constitution was made after 2014, when Russia had already invaded Ukraine. Therefore, your thinking is chronologically incorrect.
Do you mean Crimea?
Yes, Crimea and Donbass,
But in Donbass, there were no regular Russian forces.
they were regulars.
This is the first time I hear this.
Not as many as they wanted, but there were. Colonel Starkov, who was captured with his Kamaz full of weapons, intelligence officers Alexandrov and Erofeev, who were exchanged for Nadia Savchenko, hero of Russia Trondayev, who died under Lugansk, senior lieutenant, and so on. Basically, your country fought so-called quasi-units, all sorts of Gherkins, Cossacks, and so on, but they fought on the weapons that are in the Russian Federation.
I won't argue with you here.
That's why, for that reason,
Because, okay, I'm listening.
therefore, your thought is wrong that the reason for Russia's attack on Ukraine is the introduction into NATO. It was already after the attack, firstly. Secondly, you forget that both Ukraine and the Russian Federation took part in the NATO program until the beginning of the 2000s, which is called Partnership for Peace. And the Ukrainian leadership said, starting with Yushchenko, and perhaps even from Kuchma, that we want to join NATO. And your leadership, including Putin, said that you also want to join NATO. Therefore, your point of view has no argument.
Well, I must admit that, as you said about not having arguments, I am just expressing my personal point of view. I do not claim to be true in the last instance. But it seems to me that the main thing is the fear of the Russian leadership that NATO bases will be located on the southern border of Russia, in the European part of the country along the 2,500 kilometers long border, which has not yet been the case.
Look, any point of view, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I understand your point of view. Any point of view should be based on some arguments, and not just I think so. Do you understand? What were they afraid of? In 2004, when Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia joined NATO, and the distance from there was several hundred kilometers to St. Petersburg, there was silence and no fears expressed.
Moreover, even when Finland joined, there was also silence.
And Sweden joined as well. To this point of view, you expressed it, but there are no arguments for it.
Well, okay. You think there are no arguments?
What arguments could there be when Russia wanted to join NATO too?
Okay. I heard your answer. I expressed my point of view. You answered me. I, so to speak, will take this into account. I will think about it, whether it is really right or not. Maybe I will find out that it is right, and maybe it is wrong. And now, please tell me, please such a thing. Well, you explain to me your position. Because you are one of those people who express what they think more or less clearly, and provide some reasons for this. So, tell me, please, why, let's say, in my opinion, 100 countries have already recognized the existence of Pristina. Well, Kosovo, in the middle of Yugoslavia, so to speak.
There is no more Yugoslavia now.
What?
There is no Yugoslavia anymore. You can't be in the middle of it.
Excuse me, inside Serbia.
To the south of Serbia, not inside. It has a common border with Albania, Kosovo.
And it seemed to me that Kosovo was an enclave.
No, there is a common border.
I cannot argue with that.
Why argue, if you can look at the map?
I honestly admit that I did not look at the map. But it was recognized based on the fact that the people have the right to national self-determination and so on. At the same time, when the recognition of the independence of Crimea was also introduced under this mark, also referring to the decision of the court, whatever it was called, the Court of the United Nations, that Kosovo has that kind of right. Ukraine, by the way, did not recognize it. Ukraine did not. For some reason, 100 other states have recognized it. But the same states did not want to recognize Crimea. How do you think? Why?
Because Albanians live on the territory of Kosovo. They proclaimed the right to the determination of the nation because they're Albanians. And who proclaimed the right to the self-determination of which people in Crimea? The right to the self-determination of the territory, or the right to the self-determination of the nation? What nation, self-determined, in Crimea?
The Russians, first of all.
And where is it written? In some document in this Act of the Parliament of Crimea, which does not work on the official website. I cannot open.
Well, about the fact that it should be written that these are Russians, I honestly don't remember it being written that way.
What nation has decided for itself in Crimea?
Russians?
Well, where is it documented? I don't mind if it is there, but it needs checking. But I can't open it like this, because the website does not work in the official Parliament of Crimea.
Got it, got it.
And on the additional sources, I can't find it.
Good, good. Excuse me, what is your name and patronymic?
Vitaly Alexandrovich. And secondly, when this kind of decision is made under the conditions of occupation of another state, no one will even pay attention to this. In the case of Kosovo, there was no occupation of Kosovo by some other army. Albanian, for example. If Albanian troops entered the territory of Kosovo, and after that there was a decision of the Kosovo Parliament that they were separated from Serbia, it could have been unlikely that someone would recognize that. And here, in the conditions of the Russian occupation of the peninsula of the Crimea, some parliament, which, as Gherkin said, and he stated this in an interview with himself, I drove these parliamentarians to the parliament building so that they would vote for the independence. Under the occupation, no one cares what kind of decisions they make.
Please tell. I recall that there were 2 deputies voted against the decisions made by the parliament. They then went to the mainland Ukraine. Then they were arrested there for some reason. When they arrived at the mainland Ukraine, I don't know. I can't literally tell you what they said, but they said that it was a voluntary decision, not by force, let's say.
And Gherkin said that it was by force. How can we verify it?
Well, you should understand that Gherkin is an adventurer and a passerby.
No,
Who is he then?
no. If he was noticed then, and he clearly said that in Crimea, then do you think that Gherkin, without the support of the Russian Federation, would have driven the deputies of the Crimean parliament to vote? And then, without the support of the Russian Federation, he would have taken Slavyansk with 52 people? This is not just an adventurer. This is an adventurer who has support of the Russian Federation.
I think that the Russian parliament had nothing to do with it. Perhaps, maybe he was sent by some secret services, I can imagine. But in general, Gherkin was fired and he did not represent the state.
He may have not represented the state officially, but the fact that it had military support from the Russian Federation, not the parliament, but military and intelligence structures, I'm sure of that. These are old KGB methods. When a person is allegedly not in the structure for a long time, but in fact performs the will of this structure. This is old as the world.
If, as you say, this person is KGB and performs KGB's will, so to speak, secretly, then why did he shout in his whole throat that he started the war, that he did this, he did that? In my opinion, from the point of view of KGB, it would be very stupid.
Maybe. But the fact that Russia invaded Crimea and Donbass is not even doubted. It's all clear. We can talk about Gherkin for a long time, but it won't give us anything.
I think he's just a passerby. Well, that's my opinion. That's my opinion, yes.
He wasn't alone there, you see.
I know. There were 52 or 53 people with him.
This is just the first wave. Then the armor came. Then the Cossacks came. Then the volunteers. And then the regulars.
As I know that when they left for Donetsk, they left with 1,000 people.
Do you remember the video when Kobzon, the singer, visited a Buryat in Donetsk hospital? A wounded Buryat. A tankman, I think. Oh, you never saw that?
I admit I didn't see this video. Yes, I admit. No, tell me, please.
Have you not seen the videos of Buryats and Kadyrovites going on tanks in Donetsk?
When? In which year?
In 2014, video had 1 million views.
I can imagine, I think. How could the Russians get there? The citizens of Russia? Exactly. So roughly speaking, 150 million people. If for every 10,000 Russians, one of them is either a terrible lover of the Russian world or an adventurer, then 15,000 people could be gathered. That's what I think. That's why I decided that these are not regular troops. They are just adventurers.
These are just your thoughts. Excuse me. You are just making up some numbers and then conclusions out of those.
Well, okay.
You can't take it seriously.
I understand you. But tell me, please, why in the end Ukraine refused the Minsk agreements?
Ukraine refused. After the large-scale invasion began, they just stopped working.
No. Vladimir Zelensky refused before that. he said that they were illiterate. And I was still surprised. Are the diplomats of the Security Council of the United Nations so stupid that they considered and recognized some illiterate papers?
Wait. What diplomats from the UN? What are you talking about? About Ursula von der Leyen?
No, I'm telling you that they were considered at the meeting of the Security Council.
Minsk agreements?
Yes,
Maybe they were.
they were considered and were accepted and called on all countries to implement them. And Vladimir Zelensky said that they were written illiterately and therefore we will not implement them. This was all before the invasion.
I have no idea. Call Zelensky himself.
Okay, sure. Thank you for the interview. I'm glad we talked, expressing my point of view, agreeing on something or not. But such a conversation, it seems to me, between Ukrainians and Russians is useful in any case. And yelling at each other and swearing back and forth is stupid.
I completely agree with your second statement, but not with the first. These conversations are pointless.
I'm not insisting. I've expressed my point. You have yours. I have, so to speak, what you said, this information for reflection. Unfortunately, critical thinking is very lacking. For some reason, it is absent, either because of current education, or I don't know why. Both in ours and yours youth, and even in people younger than either of us in general. Unfortunately, for some reason, only emotion. Thank you for the conversation again. I hope we will cross paths again.
Same to you. Good luck. Like two old men, we talked about the youth at the end. About them having no critical thinking. Yes, but the absence of critical thinking in Ukrainian youth does not lead to aggression of the Ukrainian society and state against its neighbors. And the absence of education and critical thinking in Russian society leads to the absence of knowledge about its history, or the wrong treatment of basic historical concepts at school level. This leads to the invasion of the Russian Federation into neighboring countries. And this is not only Ukraine. Russia has invaded many places. That's to conclude my own previous words.
I'm looking for those among Russians who do not support the war in Ukraine.
Among Russians, you chose Russia.
Yeah, I put Russia in settings.
Well, you're connected to Ukraine. Why do you need people who don't support war? Are you trying to convince them otherwise?
No, I said. Basically, I want to talk to, with those who don't support it, yes.
Do you support it?
No, of course not.
So you're looking for those on your side.
Well, I'm trying.
Any luck?
Not really, to be honest.
In your opinion, how many percent of such Russians are there?
Out of 10 or 100.
Well, 100% is 100.
Well, 2
Out of 10?
of 100.
Oh, 100. Sorry, got confused myself. I see. Well, something like that, probably.
What is there to talk about with Ukrainians? It's all clear.
It's clear to you, but not to the rest. Not to the 98%.
Listen, I don't understand why. Either I'm dumb or something isn't working. I don't understand why they have so much chauvinism, so much hatred. I don't get it. You know, or are you aware? Not sure how formal should I be? When there is a misunderstanding, it always leads to a conflict. But when you are not to beat, to teach a lesson or something else, but just to destroy, it's not a conflict. It's a purposeful extermination of one ethnic group, nation, etc. It's wrong. It's more than just wrong. We live in the 21st century. God forgive.
You do live in the 21st century, and the rest of the 98% live in the 16th, 17th centuries. Have you thought of it before?
Well, about the fact that they lived back in the 16th, 17th centuries, where there were still wars for the territory, of course.
They have brains of that era.
But how? Come on, they have lived for 30 years in capitalism, in democracy, well, conditional democracy, and so on and so forth. Whole generations have grown up, roughly speaking, 2 or 3 generations have grown up.
It is considered one generation, not two, not three. 30 years is one generation.
Nevertheless, you know what? I think that until the last person who grew up in the Soviet Union consciously grew up dies, nothing will change in Russia.
Nothing will change even after that, because in the Soviet Union the chauvinism was sown, and then it continued to be sown in your Russia. You just didn't see it, most likely.
Listen, I haven't been fed this chauvinism in genes, roughly speaking.
Chauvinism is not passed in the genes. It is nurtured by the society.
I'm just saying as an example that 98% of Russians, as you say,
Because they live in the 16th and 17th centuries. Still, that's all.
those people are 30. Is it really not enough to re-educate those at the age of 30?
How would they be re-educated? If the Soviet system was directed towards Russian chauvinism, and the post-Soviet system was also directed towards it as well. Maybe you haven't seen it. You are communicating in a narrow circle, where people are adequate like you, and most of the population is not like you.
Maybe I won't argue here, but I just don't understand one fact. Let's put Soviet Union out of the picture. How long it lasted. 69 years old. Died at last.
Before that, there were 300 years of the Russian Empire, which also contributed to the chauvinistic mood. You see, you didn't have a period of non-chauvinistic mood. It was only, maybe, in the 1920s, before Stalin came to power. There was a small period when they tried to get rid of Russian chauvinism. But before that, there were 300 years of Russian chauvinism, then 70 years of the Soviets, and 30 years after that. For me, as a historian, it's the same thing, the rooting of chauvinism and nothing more.
But in the last 30 years, this chauvinism has not been so planted as in the writing of the empire.
Like in the Russian Empire, but not like that. But still, it was an integral part of everyday life.
Okay, but why then? Yes, 98% of them are chauvinists to the bone, right? But there are also people who are, let's say, pacifists. What are they called?
It doesn't matter what they are called, but there is a fact. 98% are like that. So you need to look for an explanation. Why aren't you like that? It's like you need to look at your family, your environment, your friends. And if you were in another environment, you would be among 98%, possibly.
You know, I'll tell you this. The story of my success, you could say. Back in 2014, when Crimea was occupied, there was Maidan and blah blah blah. I was in favor of it.
Of occupation of Crimea.
Yes.
You were just like the rest of the population. Then, something turned in your brain. That's the second question. And the rest didn't have anything turn.
My turn in the brain was when Nemtsov was killed.
And when the journalist woman who wrote about Chechnya was killed, nothing had turned.
She was killed when I was still a child.
Oh, you were still a kid, I understand.
She was killed in 2002 or 2005. You're talking about Politkovskaya.
Well, yes, probably.
I was in school when they killed her,
I understand that you were young.
and not even in the 5th grade.
I got it.
I didn't even know then who Politkovskaya was. What was I talking about? Well,
You had something turn in your head after the Crimea. You were for the occupation of Crimea, and then
not even Crimea. And when Nemtsov was killed, then I began to understand that something was wrong here, and that everything that happened before Nemtsov's murder, well, it didn't happen for no reason.
yes, phenomena have reasons and consequences.
Cause and effect relationship.
Yes, and the population has no idea about cause and effect relationship. Because cause and effect relationships are logic, and the population lives by emotion. It's easier to live by emotions. They said Crimea is ours, so Crimea is ours. Great, Crimea is ours. They said for 8 years they bombed Donbass, they domed Bombas.
Well, not domed Bombas, as some say. I now do understand that regulars were there, that it weren't miners who just bought military goods there.
Tornado Us,
What is Tornado House?
which is recorded in the Minsk agreements. Russian arms. A complicated machine that a miner cannot master.
Well, maybe. Just didn't make it into detail, but nevertheless, I understand that
The devil is in the details.
an ordinary miners could not hold defensive positions for 8 years.
No, of course not.
That's all. And the pockets, what was it?
Дебальцеве, Изварне,
The miners could not do that.
Ilovaisk, too.
Yes, Ilovaisk, exactly. That's why miners and tractor drivers couldn't do it.
No, they could. There was some portion of miners. But the main personnel was not from the miners.
Of course. And then, when they say that, Ukraine has sunk Moskva, destroyed the airbase in Crimea, etc., Ukraine appeals to the same logic. Oh, it's not us.
They smoked in the wrong place.
We are not there.
Yeah,
They reap what they sow.
that's all. That's it. That's the sad news for you. 98% of people live with emotions, and in the 16th century,
I just don't understand. Well, damn it. Those people for 30 years old. Well, not 30. Let it be 20 years. They have lived in an absolutely informational open field, right? That is, they have a lot of sources, a buttload of them. Excuse me for the expression. And yet, they are still like these stupid vatniks, they believe. They are led in one direction, and they just go in this direction. They don't even look around. Like, I have a Telegram channel.
you need to make an effort. And to make an effort, you need logic. And there is no logic. There are emotions.
Listen, even the Germans in 1939 and 1933 had made their effort. How many times did they try to elude Hitler?
Well, several times, yes.
Well, they were thinking people then.
There were, of course. But the main part believed them.
Believed, unfortunately, yes. But then it was possible to write everything off on the Goebbels propaganda. Now you can't write it off.
Why can't you? Ask anyone, where do they get the information? From the TV. I say, you can check it on the internet. No, I believe. That's it? And believe. That is emotions, not knowledge. What else are we going to do now?
I saw a video where Russian Kinzhals were shot down. They showed a photo, confirmed that it was a Kinzhal, even in the photo, in the video. And some American blogger said and showed that, come on, it was not a Kinzhal. Well, here they confirmed everything. See, no, that's it. They don't even believe in some imaginary future, imaginary greatness. They don't even believe in the constatation of obvious facts. Or they don't want to believe.
A person believes in what he wants to believe. If the majority of the population of the earth are believers in Allah, Jesus, Buddha, and so on, it is impossible to fact-check their beliefs. Logically, it cannot be proven. People want to believe, and so they do. Same here, they want to believe that Russia is a great country, they prefer it. Do people die? Well, at least I myself am alive.
Look, a great country can't be spending a whole year to capture Bakhmut, a small city.
Well, that's just how it is. That is it. I still believe that Russia is a great country. We took Bakhmut in a year, so we will spend another 10 years to take villages around Bakhmut.
For example,
if Christianity exists for 2,000 years, then a year or two of fighting for Bakhmut has no decisive role.
Look, it's easier for me to believe that God exists and the Russian army is the second army in the world. To be honest, from what we have now.
But people believe.
Well, I just don't know.
I got it. You're in deep contemplation.
You see, this is either under education or... I don't believe that such propaganda happens.
How do you not believe it? That's exactly how it is. The more incredible propaganda is, the easier it will be believed. A person thinks, well, you can't lie like that, so there is some kind of true basis for this. And indeed, the lie is absolute, and a person simply drowns in this lie. At first he tries to critically reason, but then he drowns.
I understand that in the lie, it is easier to live than in the real world, right? But, damn, you know, you are an older person if you were to tell anyone in 1989 that the Soviet Union will soon fall apart, right? Well, you would probably be taken to the mental hospital. That you are some kind of crazy fool. And in 1991, the Soviet Union falls apart. Here's the same thing, the denial of obvious. They do not understand that Kiev in 3 days, roughly speaking, well, not roughly speaking, but frankly speaking, but it did not work. They were screwed. Well, you are now thinking in categories from Kiev in 3 days till we took Bakhmut for a year.
Today, it's a big reason for an uproar in Russian channels.
Did they not see any irrationalities? They were shouting for a year. Well, not a year, but half a year. That they would take Ukraine and so on and so on and so on. And in the end, they fight for the damn Bakhmut for a whole year. How many were there? How many? 70, 50,000 people?
Well, 70,000 supposedly.
And behind it, there are even more cities.
Well, yes. How much time will you have to spend to take Poltava then? Well, no one thinks about that.
It's just that people probably understand why. People don't think but live with emotions, as you correctly noticed. I think they were driven into such a framework, right? I'm not talking about the Soviet era. For the last 20 years, people have been driven into such a framework, into such poverty, that they think nothing but how to feed themselves, their family. They were told something on TV. You know, a person comes home and there's some news on TV. And from day to day, from time to time, he comes home, and then in a week, he has such an opinion that Ukraine is not a country, and the Russian army is the second army in the world. And then, when we see what happens, that person doesn't agree with it. He either doesn't believe in it, or he can't believe it, or he doesn't want to believe it. Because for him, for a whole week, I'm saying, they said that Ukraine is not a country, but some odd creation.
Look, besides the fact that he was told this for a hypothetical week, he was told this all the time before that, in Soviet times and in post-Soviet times. I tell everyone one simple story, I can tell you two. Here, you have two subjects in our school on history. You have the history of the fatherland and the world history. Do you remember the school? And we have the history of Ukraine and the world history. And here we have in all textbooks in the world history from the 7th, because the 6th class is the ancient world, and the 7th class is the Middle Ages. From the 7th to the 11th class, in each class, there is a paragraph called the Moscow Principality, the Moscow Tsardom, the Russian Empire, Russia, the Soviet Union. In our program, our children know at least a little about your country, but if there is any need, he opened a textbook, and here are 2 or 3 pages. He read about this period. And now when I take your textbooks and communicate with your people, this is clearly confirmed. You do not have Ukraine anywhere in the world history. And there is no Ukraine, no Belarus, no Baltic states, no Central Asia as separate states. And these questions are considered only in your subject, which is called the history of the fatherland. In fact, this is the history of Russia. That is, you consider your neighbors as part of the history of Russia. You see? It was in the Russian royal textbooks as well, and in the Soviet textbooks a little less. And now, in Russian textbooks, you do not have neighbors, and you do not have their history. Neighbors appear only in the context of the history of Russia. Therefore, you do not perceive neither Ukraine nor Ukrainians as separate. But not you personally, but the 98%. The education system for 300 years has been saying the same thing, and it all goes very well with the right propaganda. Wild propaganda. Therefore, when you say that it is the Soviets' fault, well, the Soviets are to blame to an extent. The whole system is a problem. Everyone passes through the school. Everyone, 100% of children, go through school.
But look, even when I was studying, we were taught even gulags.
It has changed a little bit. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that you have a conflict with neighboring states, and you don't even have idea what it is when they formed, how it developed among neighbors.
Considering the fact that many Russians think that the Second World War began in 1941, I am not surprised at all at this point.
These are all details. And there is a global thing through which everyone passes. Everyone passes through the education system, and such an attitude towards neighbors is formed. And this attitude does not change. Since the creation of school textbooks, they were created in the early 20th century. But for the last 100 years, this system has not changed. When there was no education system until the second half of the 19th century, we can throw it away. School textbooks in history are, for example, Milovaisky, one of the first textbooks from early 20th century. You have no neighbors. If there are neighbors, this is part of your story.
Neighbors are like Germany. Europe is neighbors. Everything that is further from Europe, in the sense closer to us, is not neighbors anymore. It is, as it is now called, the sphere of our interest.
Yes. That's what I'm talking about. So when you wonder how it could be, and it was all developed for centuries, the fact that you fell out of this system, that's just you who fell out of this system.
I'm a failure in this system.
Yes, you are a failure in this system. The system needs to be changed, and it is very difficult to change this system. I would even say it's impossible.
But hey, Germans were able to change their way of thinking.
They were able to because they lost the war. So that if you, or rather, when you will lose the war, the system might change. But that's not certain, because Germany is a smaller country that had its system changed by force, by Americans.
There's such a thing as revanchism.
In this case, you won't be occupied. The Ukrainian army won't reach either Petersburg or Moscow. There's not even a goal like that. That's unfeasible. So to format you, your history and understanding of it, your state must, excuse me, but it must fall. And then the splinter states will be able to write histories of their own. But for now we have that. Even if we retake all of the lost land, nothing will change in Russia. Your next generation will grow up the same. You'll find a justification for losing. For example, Putin was bad, his underlings. But even if you will hang Putin, you won't change the textbooks. You'll still view neighbors as a sphere of influence. That's why currently there's no solution for this.
No, I do fully agree. But why? Were 30 years, roughly, really not enough?
Yes,
I understand there were 300 years of that mentality before the last 30.
Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. Another magnitude of effort.
So what can I do?
What?
What can I do now?
I don't know what to do, and who is to blame are Russia's eternal problems.
What can be done to turn those 98% into 2%, a minority?
Only dissolution. That's how I see it. I don't see other options.
But Soviet Union had collapsed. Do you think it helped?
Of course. It helped Baltic states. It helped Ukraine. It didn't help Belarus.
It didn't help Ukraine either.
What do you mean? It did. We changed our education system. We rebuilt it.
Belarus is occupied. Ukraine is at war. How did the dissolution help Russia? I meant...
It didn't help Russia. I'm only talking about your neighbors. It helped neighbors, but didn't help you, so further dissolution is needed, towards an even lesser state. To write history again.
So we're not able to threaten anyone.
Yes, because if since the times of Peter I you were a threat to the entire Europe, since communists you are a threat to the entire world. It's a global problem. What to do with you and your nukes?
But wait, for example, to the world. I don't only mean civilized Western world. I mean all of it, China, India, and so on, right? Just imagine that Russia collapses into, like, 10 states, each of them with nuclear weapons.
No, each of them won't have nuclear weapons, it's unreal. But it's also a possibility.
But when in 1991 the Soviet Union was dissolved, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Russian Federation had nukes, as well a few in Belarus. Each one of them was disarmed. Everything was given to Russia. Where will those go when Russia itself collapses? The Muscovy Republic of Moscow.
They'll exchange it for bread. For bush legs. When there will be many states, and those will have arguments over the land, when the civil war will start, you'd give away those weapons yourself, just to get that bread.
Like in 90s.
Yes, pretty much. But in 90s, there were no plans to dissolve USSR and then Russia.
There weren't, but resources were given away for food.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Peace in exchange for bread. Nuclear weapons in exchange for bread. Kind of like that.
Regretfully.
Keep thinking about how you should rebuild Russia. or whether you even should.
It's probably not up to my generation to decide.
Well, it is like that.
In my lifetime, it will dissolve.
Hope dies last. Okay, goodbye. Good luck.
Bye.